Good. All right, we'd like to thank everybody for coming on out to Jacobs here. We appreciate him giving us a chance to go over some basics with flooring today with you guys. We've set up a stage for a mock installation. We're going to cover today your waterproof flooring, specifically the Cortec brand, which Jacob carries the full line of it here. What's important about the Cortec line is two things. One is the wear layer. This product has a 20 mil wear layer. As you start to shop for waterproof flooring, it's a hot category of flooring today. You're going to see dozens and dozens of options out on the market. What's important is that wear layer. A lot of the other brands today are going to have a 12, an 8, and even a 6 mil wear layer. So it's 1/3 the thickness of what you have with the Cortec line. Secondly is the composition of the material. The Cortec line has a WPC or SPC core. That's important because it mitigates expansion, contraction, and movement of the floor. A lot of the cheaper brands that you guys will see in the big box stores are going to be a high concentration of PVC vinyl. They will expand and contract with humidity, moisture, temperature, and you don't want to see that, especially if you're doing a large installation. Cortec lets you do a full whole level of a home without transition strips between doorways. You don't get that with the other brands of floor. The other thing about Cortec is this brand is owned by Shaw. Shaw is owned by Berkshire Hathaway. You have two great brands behind this company, so you can ensure that the quality is there in the product, and that lifetime warranty would actually have some meaning. That company will still be there if you ever needed support. A lot of the other brands, we call them in-house brands. They have them this year. They probably won't have them next year or the year after that. So if you're making an investment in your home, the Cortec product is the way to go. If you plan on staying, let it be an investment. If you're doing a flip, a rehab, a rental, something that you're going to sell in a couple years, they also have a lot of options here at Jacobs from you. Closeout deals, bargain buys they have. But if it's an investment in the home that you're going to be in for some time, we definitely recommend looking at the Cortec. You have well over 200 options too. So the diversity of colors, styles, and options are going to be pretty unparalleled in the other brands. So what we want to cover today is going to be some of the basic tools you would need for a basic installation. We also have set up just some of the preparation work you might need to do on an average install. This is Jason, and Jason will be doing most of the heavy lifting here, showing you guys that. But we'll go through the basic installs. If anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand. I'll be glad to answer a question along the way or at the end. Just to cover your tools, for most of these products, you need really basic tools. You can score and snap this product, and Jason's going to show you that during the installation. You can use a radial saw and a table saw. That can assist and make things a little bit easier in a larger layout or a complicated install. It's not a bad idea to have a table saw and a chop saw, but you definitely can get away with some basic tools, a jigsaw, and these basic hand tools. To start with the hand tools, for us, one of the most important things is our tapping block that we use. We use a tapping block that you can purchase at Lowe's. It's a Blue Hawk brand. This black block runs you about $9 a block. In almost 20 years of doing floors, this is the only block we use on all our floating floors. It is the most versatile. We just like its design and setup, so we'd recommend this block for your installation. A lot of companies sell a kit with a block, hammers, some shims, but I would recommend getting that block, and if they have a kit there as well, you can go with that. You also want a speed square, and that's going to make your score and snap easier, and he'll show you during the install that you're going to have a nice straight line to score this and snap the material, and a good sharp utility knife. Basic pry bars to pull off the wall. These are different tools to get it off the wall and close up end joints. So you'll have a variety of, we call them slam bars, and they'll have those as well for about $12 at most stores. And then, of course, just a hammer and a chalk line. The chalk line, as you'll see, is to get your starting rows nice and straight, make sure that everything's perpendicular to itself, 90 degrees, and that'll make sure that the install goes smooth moving forward. A good level or straight edge. A lot of people will grab a 2x4, make sure it's straight. Just because it's a 2x4, it could have a good hook or bend and give you a reading that's not accurate to the subfloor. We use 6-foot or 8-foot levels. You can use a 4-foot, but this is going to give you a little bit more accurate reading of the subfloor conditions. You'll see in most installations you're going to have some deviation of the subfloor seam where they join together. Maybe it's a little weathered during the new construction process. Maybe there was settling of the house. So you'll see that these seams can create a little bit of imbalance on the floor, and we'll show you with that how we correct that. The other thing you'll come into is dips or bellies in the subfloor. And the goal is to try to get the floor as close to 3/16 of an inch in a 10-foot radius. That can be tough, and these products are super forgiving. We've got installations where it's not practical to level it to that standard, and it really will handle a ½ inch in about 6 to 8 feet. It won't compromise the product. You'll have a little bit of a crown or a dip in the floor, but do your best to try to get it as flat as possible. The goal is flat. It's not level. A lot of people get hung up on using the bubble on a level to get the floor level. The whole floor could have a little bit of pitch as long as it's flat. It's not going to compromise the tongue and groove. So you're looking for flat. That's the goal of it. So the other tool that I wanted to cover is an undercut saw. They make some manual ones, but this is a super handy tool to have at home regardless. It's an oscillating tool that will undercut your jambs, and Jason's going to demonstrate that as well. You can pick these up for about 50 bucks, and it's just handy to have at the house regardless. There's various adapters that you can put on it other than cutting. There's scraping blades, sanding pads, so worth the investment. Just a good tool to have at the house anyways. We'll start by showing the correction of this little dip in the floor here. This one isn't too bad. It's about 3/8 of an inch, and Jason will kind of go over mixing up some quick set leveling compound that we would use to level that belly out so you don't feel movement in the subfloor. There's a couple of different types of leveling compounds. When you go to the big box stores, they're going to have some that would be known as a quick set or fast patch. You have about 30 minutes total working time, and really about 15 to get it spread out and set. Then within an hour you can lay your floor over top of it. That's going to be for minor corrections, small areas, little patches like this that you're missing some subfloor and you want to smooth that out. So the fast patch, if you have some experience working with Portland cement or compounds, go ahead and work with that. If you have a larger area to correct, a big belly, a big dip over a span, they make compounds in 50-pound bags called self-leveling. It's going to be a little more fluid, and it'll lay out and screed out easier. It's a little more forgiving. Some folks get working with this and it's setting up too fast and they get frustrated and they're having a hard time smooth it out. So if you've got time, yep, this here, a self-leveling compound, you're able to do that in a big span. Anything that you're getting at beyond 40 square feet of leveling, I would recommend using that. So as a general rule of thumb, in a correction of a dip, these materials cover 1/8 of an inch per 40 square feet. So if you have a ½ inch dip and it's in an 8x5 area, it's going to take 4 bags to fill that belly in. So it can start to add up pretty quick in correcting a big dip. Our recommendation on that is if you have a subfloor substrate, use some ½ inch plywood in the lowest part of that so you don't have to use as much cement and you'll still screed it across as we'll show with this dip. So Jason will go ahead and get that mixed up real quick for you guys.
Pre-measured the water in the bucket according to the bag.
You got that quick start. Yeah, always follow the instructions on the bag. Don't just mix it to feel. Read the bag, how many ounces of water, and always do it to their standard. Does anyone have any questions while we're looking to set this out? You got your marker on you? Cool. So often what we'll do is we'll just mark the floor where the dip is, because it generally does taper out. You know, you get out to here and the level makes contact. So we'll usually map that out just kind of roughly, so you have an idea of how much material to put down. You'll see the biggest part of the dip in the center. We'll usually write it down, whatever it is, and that'll help you kind of calculate how much material you need to correct it. If you got an extra body, it always does help. You're good. You can screed it out. Just go ahead and spread as much as you can with that, and then we'll use the level as a screed. And you'll notice with this stuff, it's a bit stiffer of a mix because you do have less working time with it. If you use the self-leveling, it's quite liquid, and it'll spread out on its own a bit. So typically with this, we're going to use a trowel. If you can get a 16 or 18-inch trowel, it's really going to help versus you'll see a lot of them are 8, 10 inches. That's fine. They have cement, regular cement you'd want to use for that. Yep, yep. So once you kind of get it set out, you can use a level like this, and it's a screed. It's going to help cut the material across there to help even it out. That's grabbing any excess material and filling in the voids. Yeah, it's fine. It's just, yep. As it starts to set in about, like I said, 30 minutes, you can still work the material, feather out some edges. This is for, rough purposes, but you can pull these edges out and get a nice smooth outside edge so you don't have any lips. So you just do that, work it out, get a nice flat surface, and you'll see that you filled the belly in so that the floor doesn't have excess movement on it. The big key is anything that's dramatic. If you've got a 1/2 inch and 3 to 4 feet, you really want to work that out. If you've got a 1/2 inch and 6, it's going to handle it. At that point, it's a matter of aesthetic. Does that 1/2 inch crown bother you? Would you like that worked out of the floor? The other thing we didn't show with this, just because of time constraints, is priming the subfloor. They do make primers. It's going to help this concrete Portland cement bond better. So the latex primers you'd put on there, you roll it on with a paint roller. Takes about 30 minutes. That'll help ensure this bond to the plywood. We generally don't have issues with bonding to plywood. It's glossier surfaces like tile, polished concrete. That's where it becomes really important to use that primer and make sure that you get a good bond to the substrate. Because the plywood's porous and it has texture, this material generally gets into there and gets a good grab anyways. So we're not as concerned about it on plywood, but if you're going over any glossy tile, if you're going over top of a polished concrete, make sure you use the primer that the manufacturer sells with it. It's a latex-based product. You spread it out, let it tack up dry, and then you can put your cement over top of it. So the second thing that we want to show is this crown in the middle where the seams are. And you're looking for balance between the two. So sometimes it's not just filling this all with cement. If you can take part of this crown out and fill it, you'll find a happy medium and a balance in it. For doing a large amount, if you end up with a house and you pull up your carpet and all your seams are really bad, you might consider renting a sander like this. It's an edger. You can rent it for about $50 for a day. This is what they would use to sand and finish floors on the perimeter. So it's kind of an aggressive sander. Otherwise, if you have a basic belt sander, that'll do the trick too. But if you pull up your subfloor and all your seams are really uneven and puckered and you need to do a lot of sanding work, go ahead and rent one of these. It'll make the work a lot easier. They have different grits that they would rent at the stores, you want to get a really aggressive grit, and that means a low grit, 24, 36. That's going to be really abrasive, and that'll chew up the subfloor. You're not looking for a fine sanding because you're not finishing a floor, so you want something that just chews up that floor and gets it flat for you. So look for the most aggressive grit. Don't go to 100, 120 grit. Get something in that 24 to 36 if they have it. Jason will show you that real quick. Now often when you sand these seams are on joist, they're where they're buttoned up, and there's going to be nails and screws throughout there that's putting it down. So before you sand, you make sure none of those are sticking up real bad. If they are, you'll be shooting sparks. It's not going to hurt anything. But if you really bang them down and countersink them just below that level, you're not going to see sparks shooting and wearing the pad out a lot faster. If you got a whole row of those, you'll chew the pad up pretty fast. So countersink any of those nails or screws that you see sticking up so that you're not chewing the pad up too bad. Do the demo for that, yep. Of course, after you've done your basic floor preparation, your leveling, your sanding, sweep, vacuum the floor really well. Debris underneath, floating floors are the #1 cause for concern. People hear noise and movement and things under there, so sweep it well, vacuum it well to make sure that you got a nice clean substrate. If you're going on a wood subfloor like this deck is built, you don't need a vapor barrier. If you're going on slab or concrete, it's recommended. You don't have to, but you might as well use a 6 mil vapor barrier. That would mitigate transmission of moisture from the concrete that could happen seasonally or annually. And so if you've got concrete on slab or in a basement, buy the 6 mil vapor barrier. When you buy 6 mil vapor barrier, don't buy it in the individual rolls that they sell. They'll sell it in 100, 150 square feet. They're going to charge you 3 times as much as if you buy a large roll that they would use when they pour concrete. So when they pour 6 inches of concrete, 4 inches of concrete, they put a 6 mil underneath there on the earth, on ground. And if you buy it in that fashion, you're paying about 3 cents a square foot. So it's really reasonably priced. It'll help keep the moisture into the concrete. We have had jobs of these flood fully, and it helped keep some of the moisture underneath that vapor barrier and out of contact with the floor. If the floor does get wet, it's not going to hurt it. This is 100% waterproof, the Cortec. And we've had 3 jobs fully flood, submerged in basements where there was 3 inches of standing water. We were able to have a restoration company suck all the water out. We came in, unclicked the floor. They ran dehumidifiers, and we were able to reinstall the same floor. So it is 100% waterproof. But in one of those instances, it wasn't a full flood. It went underneath the vapor barrier. We had to only take about half the floor out because it didn't reach all of the floor and then reinstall it. So we would recommend the vapor barrier overall. It can make a little bit of noise underneath the floor until you've walked on it and settled it down because there's going to be some creases and folds in that vapor barrier. So that would be the one instance. If that's going to bother you, if you're not going to be able to wait till that settles down underneath, you might not want to use it, but otherwise there's no harm in putting it down. Throughout the perimeter of your room, you're likely going to have some door jambs where there's casing that comes down to your floor. And generally there's going to be a jamb molding on the inside of that too, so you have your casing and your jamb. You want to use this oscillating tool to undercut all of those for a professional look. You see a lot of people notch in around those and caulk it or leave it. That's a quick indicator that it was a homeowner job. You want to make sure it looks professional, and so you trim these moldings so your floor tucks underneath it. Jason will show that. Just take a scrap piece of floor and butt it right up to it. That's going to allow the material to tuck neatly under there so it has a professional look. So you'd go around the entire perimeter anywhere that you have that. Some folks get the idea that they want to use that for the baseboard molding around the perimeter of the room as well, and undercut and tuck. That's not practical. You either need to remove your baseboard and reset it on top of the floor, or add a shoe molding around the perimeter of the room. The shoe molding will help keep a cleaner, tighter look. And we do hear some folks that say, I just don't like the look of shoe. In that instance, pull your baseboard and reset it. But the shoe molding will contour irregularities of the subfloor better than the baseboard. The baseboard contours the walls well. So for a tighter, cleaner look and a lot less hassle than pulling on your baseboard and resetting it, we recommend adding a shoe molding. We get asked a lot, should I do matching to the floor or matching to the baseboard? If you have white baseboard, a white shoe looks cleaner. When you do matching to the floor, kind of looks like the floor is coming up the wall, and you visually lose some of the height of your baseboard. So if you have a 3-inch baseboard, you put a 3/4 up against that, now it looks 2 1/4. So our recommendation would be a white or painted if you have white baseboard. If you have a stained molding, stain some shoe to match that molding, not the floor. It's just a cleaner look altogether. So Jason's going to show you just some quick installation of the Core-Tech. We're going to show you 2 methods, a tap down method and another one where we lock our end joint first and then tap the long seam. Try to envision walls on each side of this. We wanted to keep the layout open so you could see it, but typically you would obviously have a wall that you'd be working on each side. You can start with a full plank, half a plank, third a plank, that really doesn't matter. You can do a quick measurement of the room, and if it was going to leave you a little 2-inch piece, then start with a cut so it doesn't do that. You like to see about an 8 to 10-inch piece on the start and the finish. On your first row, you get your 2 planks and lock them together. Obviously, in a longer run, you'd have a few planks. Make sure that this joint is nice and square and tight. There's not a gap on either side of it. Then what we go through is we cut a 1/3, 2/3, and a half. Like I said, this stuff scores and snaps fairly easy, as Jason's going to show you. Use a straight edge to help guide you in that. And you can make one good pass with a knife and then score and break it. And that would be a 1/3. Go ahead and grab us a half. And a 2/3. And the reason we're doing this is you want a random stagger of your end joints. We do see installations where someone goes full half, full half, full half through the whole job. That lines the end joints up in a running brick bond pattern, and it generally doesn't look professional. The manufacturers want you to stagger the end joints. That way you get a little more stability and just a natural wood look, not a brick look. There are some Core-Tech tiles that they sell that have a tile pattern. In that instance, you would generally do the running brick bond where it's full half through the install. So this gets us a nice start there with some planks to get a random start. You're going to get some others off your cuts off the end. How we like to work with the Core-Tech is we'll start with this next plank and lock it in. It goes in fairly well. If you see any gaps, you can take your tapping block and your hammer and rest it down on here. There's a wider side here. We rest that on top of the tongue, and you can gently tap to close up any gap that you see if you do. Generally, the milling's really good. It locks in nice. You're good to go with it there. How we like to do the installation ourselves is this next plank, long tongue side facing me here, and that on this too, long tongue facing here, short on the back against the wall. We're going to lock this plank in on this butt joint first. And just get a good wiggle. Again, check that it's tight. You're going to get a small lift on it. That just popped in on its own there already. And there's a small gap here. Put this block here. Keep your fingers under just to have a little pitch. It needs a little bit of pitch to engage. And then just gently tap that in. When we do it that way, we're tight here, we're good here. If you have a minor gap here, you can come back down here and give it a little tap. It doesn't take a lot of pressure. You don't need to hit it hard. We do that method of installation ourselves. The manufacturer will show a method where they're going to lock this plank in, and this one with a, give me a full please. with a gap down here. They're not going to engage the end joint first. They leave that gap, and then they tap that down. And that's fine too, especially if you have help. Why we don't like to do it that way is we're moving in a fast-paced large area. It's easier to over-tap and get a little bit of a pucker on that end joint when you tap it. So we mitigate that by locking this end joint first and then tapping that long in. You don't really, some of these planks you'll work with are 6 feet long, so it's hard to see that end joint 6 feet away. With a 4-foot plank, you can see it pretty good. You don't have to worry about over-tapping it as much. For your end walls there, if you imagine a wall is present, a lot of people have the tendency to grab this tape measure and measure this distance off the wall. You don't need to do that. You can take the plank, put it in reverse, so we have long tongue facing this way, flip the plank in reverse, go to the wall, his hand's the wall, and just mark that spot there. That automatically gives you that fill piece there without using a tape. Makes it a lot faster than having to grab a tape measure every time and double check that measurement. When he makes that cut, he has his piece to fill to the wall. This piece automatically becomes one of the new starter pieces. That's going to help give you your random stagger throughout the installation as well. If you make a mistake, something happens, you ding a corner bad, this stuff pops out really easy. You can unclick it and unclick and replace the plank very easily. So we just say take your time, watch your sharp corners, your 90s. Those are the ones that could get dinged up if you're not careful. And then, so these end joints here and here is what you want to kind of keep some distance. You see people who will stack them really close and do what we call a stair step, where they have one here, one here, one here, one here. That doesn't look natural. You'll catch that in the field of the floor. So give it some random stagger to it. Don't take a piece this size and put it right here, because this will line up with that in that running brick bond pattern. Take a plank that's a different size and offsets those joints. Let me get that one there. So as you can see, it moves pretty fast. This floor has a very busy pattern to it, and you'll see a lot of floors today that have a lot of contrast in them or shade variation. When you get a floor like that, you do have to be cognizant of your layout. You don't want to stack a bunch of the really dark boards in one spot, so you generally open a couple boxes. You might even want to sort the boxes of your darks, your lights, your mediums, and get a good balance on the floor. You hate to step back and see that you're in a big line of dark planks or light planks in one spot. Give it some randomness too as well with that. And before you start, open a couple boxes of the floor you're selected to make sure you get a good idea of that range of color. The backs of the display boards do a pretty good job of showing that, but some of them will have a little more contrast than what you might expect. Yep. Good question. Nope. So with the Core-Tech, there is no acclimation required because it does not expand and contract. You can bring it in and install it the same day. Now, if it's sitting out in your garage and it's 0 degrees outside, still bring it in to warm up and get the temperature right. But there's not an acclimation period for that floor. You can install it same day, bring it home same day, especially this time of year. And in regards to expansion contraction, you put a gap around the perimeter of the room, not for the floor, because the envelope of buildings move. Your house moves, the outside walls move. So that's why you will have some expansion around the perimeter, and you'll cover that with that shoe molding. No glues required for this floor. The only time that they would recommend any adhesive is if you want this to go underneath your kitchen cabinets. And we do have some people that just say, I'm going to lay it all, do my cabinets then. If you do that, put the adhesive that the manufacturer is going to recommend underneath the cabinets and 2 foot around and out beyond that perimeter. That would allow that the weight of the cabinet on top of the floor, when the cabinets move with the envelope of the building, they're not tugging on the floor and pull it apart. The rest of the planks won't move because they are inert. The material doesn't expand and contract. So that would be the only time that you would use it in adhesive with this. Otherwise, you can run this through all the rooms, no transitions in the doorways, no T-moldings needed to separate rooms or large spans. Yeah, so on a big run on this, we know this floor is nice and square and tight because we can see all our end joints right now. If this was a 20-foot long room, our recommendation is get that first row going and get your second row going and get an extra guy and pull a chalk line on it. So you'd get 2 rows set, and imagine this being 20 feet, and lay this chalk line over to see if you have any hooks or bellies or bows in the floor, and correct that before. So you'd have a back wall here if this was a normal installation, and you can put some shims in there to correct a little hook or belly in the floor. The other thing that we do, once you do this row and you get your line on it and you know it's nice and straight 20 feet down, we would mark the wall at this joint here, your little base, where your baseboard comes in, mark the wall there and do it on that end. That way, as you start to work body of the floor, if you see this line come out of line with the one you put on the wall, it's a little registration mark. You know that something moved a little bit, something shifted a bit. Recheck it, make sure it's nice and straight. The reason it's important to keep it nice and straight is if that reconnects to another part of the floor. So if you have a wall in the middle of the living room separating the kitchen, this floor has to meet back up to itself and reconnect. If you get a belly or a hook in there, it's going to have a difficult time doing that. So make sure you get a nice straight starting row, those first 2, 3 rows, make sure they're nice and straight, do a double check on them. We generally, once we get those 3 rows out, would grab boxes from the installation and stack them back here to create a little bit of weight on there so it doesn't want to shift around anymore. Also, what we do is on a finish wall, imagine that this is your wall and you're at the end of your room. We do the same thing kind of like we did on our finish walls over there. You need a space between here and here to fill of less than a full plank. What we do in that instance is tongue, facing tongue just like it is, bring this piece into here and line this tongue up with that tongue on all ends. Take just a scrap piece like this. You got a marker? Do I have it? That'll give the gap there. And then you would use this piece as a guide along your wall. That'll show. If this was your gap on the finish wall, you're using this piece as a guide to mark your floor across. What that does is contours irregularities of a finish wall precisely to the piece you need to finish on that wall. On a long rip piece like this, you can use a table saw or a circular saw. We work with it quite a bit, so we are able to just go down that line, follow it, and still score and snap it. A lot of that'll have to do with what you do regularly. Even if you're having a hard time doing it, you could use some tools to score and snap. It will score and snap even on the rip walls if you need it to. So then that piece would fit and contour in there perfectly to the irregularities of your finish wall. Any other questions come to mind for you guys? Anything you can think of, Jay? Okay. Well, we appreciate you guys coming out. Glad we could spend a little time with you, educate you about the products. If you have any questions, always reach out to the folks here at Jacobs Supply. They can always reach us too, especially if it's a technical question regarding installation. Jason and I have nearly 2 decades of installation experience, so we're glad to assist them and any of their customers and questions they may have. Otherwise, enjoy, and thanks for coming on out. Appreciate it.